I gotta read. Sorry.
Dude, this is how all of them started off.
Dude, you just like went into it. I'm like, oh, we're started.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Nick.
I'm Sean.
Today we have the singer-songwriter Donovan Taylor. This is a new series from our company, Tearing Out Recordings, where we interview singer-songwriters and talk about process, inspiration, and all that stuff.
A new EP called Falling and Being Found. And these two guys are going to play some instruments on it. These guys are good guys, though.
And if you want us to play in your stuff, go to tearingoutrecordings.com. The link will be in the description. But without further ado, we have Donovan here.
Hey, my name is Donovan Taylor. I am a New York City-based artist, musician. I write music. It's pretty fun. So I live in Washington Heights in Manhattan, and I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah, cool. So you are primarily a drummer. Or at least I met you as a drummer.
Yes.
So can you talk about sort of like how you got into music and how you went from... Well, I don't know. Did you start playing drums first or did you start writing songs first?
That's a great question. So drums is definitely like my primary instrument. My first instrument I ever learned was piano. But the first time I fell in love with music was definitely through drums and percussion. So that's what I definitely started with when I was living in the Chicago area. But around that time, I also started writing songs. My first song I ever wrote was in 8th grade. And it was this really cool experience for me. But I think I got a little psyched out because everybody was really good at singing and everybody was really good at the piano. And I was like, oh crap. I'm not as good as these people, right? And then so drums was something I was excelling at. So I think I just really dove more into that. And I did my undergrad in percussion performance, and I actually did my master's in jazz studies on drums, which is where I met you guys. But writing music has kind of always been something I wanted to do. And when I moved out here to New York City and stuff, I think, sorry, this is a long answer, by the way.
Yeah.
But when I moved out here to New York City, I was really sick at the time. And kind of to cope with the sickness, I started writing music. And I don't know, it kind of came out of nowhere, but it was really cathartic and really healing. And I was noticing if I played on a gig where we played my music, people would be like, oh yeah, man, you're a pretty good drummer, but I loved your music. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I guess that's a thing. And even when we were in this ensemble, Sean and I were in this ensemble with Dave Liebman. And I remember I had this private thing with him once, a lesson or whatever. And he was like, you should really pursue composition more. And I was like, okay. And then I met Paul Chihara, who is my mentor. He's a veteran Hollywood composer. He's a really good friend and has been a huge help for me. But he kind of I don't know, my identity from being a drummer blossomed. Not that there's anything wrong with being a drummer, but I feel I definitely evolved into more of who I really am as I started composing and writing songs. And I didn't want to be a singer at all. Because I'm so intimidated by everybody else's voices. But as I wrote the lyrics and as I wrote the music, my wife and I were talking and I realized it kind of had to be my voice. And so that's kind of how I got to the point where I'm at now, where I'm writing music where I sing, and I get to play with cool people. And so that's kind of a long answer, but I feel I am a drummer in my soul, but I feel I've kind of butterfly.
Right.
Grown into something even more than just a drummer.
Yeah.
So.
Sick.
Yeah.
So you're going through the whole music curriculum, right? Did you ever formally take... I know you took lessons with Paul Chihara, right? Mm-hmm. Outside of that, did you ever take any formal composition lessons from undergrad or graduate program?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I said, I think I got scared in... not that I got scared into just being a drummer or percussionist, but I really got pushed in that direction, and I thought I wanted that to a point where I remember when I was wanting to compose more, I came to a professor who was a great guy, but he definitely shut me down. Kind of being it was you're a percussionist, go play percussion. Composers will compose, you go play percussion. And I was like, dang it. I really wanted to. But in my undergrad, I had a few really amazing professors that gave me liberty to do that. And then Honestly, what kind of helped me get into writing music was playing in like rock bands. And like I played in a really fun rock band. They're still out there. Their name's Grove. And it was just like fun to break the rules a little bit. And we like didn't care. And I think that like helped me too to be like, oh, I don't have to like follow these rules necessarily. But by the time I was in my master's, I was definitely composing on the side a lot. And like I said, I started taking with Paul Chihara, and it kind of blossomed them from there. So I don't know if that really answers your question. I guess school and like the formalities of like education, music education, in some ways hurt me maybe a little bit as a composer, but it also, there were a lot of doors opened.
Right.
Because
yeah, I feel like a lot of the musical thing is like just showing you different things that you'd have never thought about before.
totally.
And meeting people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But then at that point, like, yeah, like you said, like, it kind of intimidated you. And I've been there too, you know, it's like you have professors who are kind of like, stay in your lane or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of, I feel like detrimental as a creative.
It can be for sure. But like at the same time, like my undergrad, I did percussion performance, and I remember I was so mad because all I cared about was playing drums, like drum set. That's all I cared about, and they were like putting me in orchestras and like learning gamelan or I don't know, like all these things, and I was like, what the heck? I don't want to do this. But it's funny because like now, as I compose and write music, like all of the experience I draw on are from those groups,
Right? Yeah.
that I didn't want to do,
Yeah.
but like
Right.
now I'm like. You know, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. You know what I mean?
It's gonna make its way into your like psyche one way or another. I feel
No,
like. And
totally.
any of that musical stuff, especially like when you're sort of coming up and like you're being introduced to music, and it's like, okay, this is how music works. It's like all that sticks with you.
Yeah,
I
it's
feel
like your
it
first
does.
experience.
It
Yeah.
really does.
But then you also have influences, like, I know you're really into Sufjan Stevens.
Oh yeah, for
Who
sure.
are some of your big like classical or jazz influences? Like, let's say non-school influences.
Yeah, I mean, well, you said like the biggest one. My wife and like my close friends always make fun of me. They're like, it's not a conversation with Donovan if he doesn't talk about Sufjan Stevens at some point. And like, it's almost to a fault, you know? But I love Sufjan. But he's a big influence on me for a lot of different reasons. And I think that's like kind of, sorry, I feel like I'm going back to our previous point.
No,
like,
it's all good.
I loved the drums, but I think my heart always like resonated way more with like stuff like Sufjan Stevens.
Right.
And I think like in the back of my mind, I always wanted to be more like him than I ever wanted to be like Max Roach. Even though I have like nothing but like absolute adoration for Max Roach, I feel like my idols that I knew I wanted to be like were more of these like singer-songwriters. So like Sufjan Stevens is a huge example to me of like artistry. He keeps things fresh. Like Sean and I talked about it once, how he'll put out like a folk album, and then like the next thing he does is like hardcore electronic music, and then he'll do like something completely different from that.
Yeah.
And also like, I mean, on a lot of levels, he's like religiously similar to me, but I like the way he's not like trite or stereotypical by any means, and like how he goes about things.
Right.
Which for me is like really refreshing, where it's like, oh, he's like Christian, but he's like cool. You know, it's like it's nice. So I think like Sufjan, I feel like for me like and I feel like so many musicians say this, but Radiohead and like Tom York, I feel like there's like before Radiohead and after Radiohead. I feel like that's how you could like define my musical journey.
Right.
Like I was first introduced to Radiohead by my brother, and to be honest, I didn't like it. I was like, I don't even know what this is. Like, I guess it's cool. I liked the song Videotape and Reckoner from In Rainbows. But everything else, like, I heard Kid A and I was like, what the heck is this? And then in college, though, particularly the album Kid A, when I first, like, heard Everything in Its Right Place, like that first chord,
Yeah.
da-da-da-da-boom. I don't know, man. That was, like, a change in my life.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is unreal. And so I think, like, a lot of the colors that I love in music have kind of blossomed from Radiohead. So those are just two examples. I could list a lot, but I won't.
Yeah, but those are the two big ones, I feel.
Yeah, they are for sure.
You grew up in Chicago, right?
Yeah, outside of Chicago.
Outside
yeah.
of Chicago, and then I know you lived in Utah for a while.
Yes.
Too. Studied music in Utah, right?
Yeah.
So like, how would you? I mean, other than like the obvious of like Chicago and living in Utah, how would you say like studying music in those two places differed?
That's a great question. Between Chicago and Utah,
Uh,
I mean, Chicago, Utah, and New York are like completely different cities.
Yeah.
But it's like about as like across the spectrum as you can get. But Chicago, it's hard to say because I was so young. You know, like for example, like jazz clubs in Chicago, the only one I could really go to was like the Jazz Showcase. You know, because like I could go if I was under 21. But like growing up in Chicago, oh, that's such a good question, Sean. You're piercing my soul. I'm trying to think here. I would say Chicago it's very classic to me. I don't know if that makes sense, but like if I had to like Chicago has this like historic element to it. I think the best, like even the architecture of Chicago, it's just got this like I don't want to say classy, but like a lot of my experiences with music were through like historical things. Like I was part of the Jazz Institute of Chicago, and like I got to do this thing where we'd go to any show that was at the Symphony Center. We got in for free as kids in high school.
Wow.
And so we got to go and we got to meet the musicians backstage. So I got to meet like Christian McBride, you know, I got to meet Wynton Marsalis, Brian Blade, Danilo Perez, you know what I mean? And just like all these people. And then I also played in the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra, which was like, so I think just like a lot of those experiences like really like showed me how high music could go, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Utah was a different experience because I actually didn't want to go to Utah. I was accepted to a school. I was accepted to Eastman School of Music, technically. Well, I was for drums for jazz, but I like went to BYU instead. It's a religious school, you know, and I went there and I didn't like really want to be there necessarily, which is, you know, shame on me, because I ended up having like a good experience and I even like met my wife and stuff. But from a musical standpoint, I learned a lot out in Utah. Utah is definitely, it's LA kind of, it's Provo, which is where I went to school, is kind of like, I would almost say part of LA. And people who are in the Provo music scene might hate me for saying that. But like, I feel like if you're in Provo and you do well, you either stay in Provo and do well, or a lot of them go to LA.
Right.
I feel like I was pretty unique in that I was like, okay, going to New York City, you know? So if, I would say like the idea you might have about LA music might be very similar to what you know about Provo music. Like some big names like Imagine Dragons, which is like, you know, they came from Provo, which is like the big claim to fame. But like Provo, which I'm not that into that band, but like there's a really big like underground music scene in Provo too. Like some like really like intense like electronic music, avant-garde music that's going on there. There's a lot of like really cool artistic stuff happening in Provo, but it's just like it's definitely more under the radar because it's like a small town in Utah and nobody really expects that necessarily. And then coming to New York City was a completely different experience that I don't even know how to put into words because it's just crazy here. So,
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, the thing about Utah that's like super interesting, like it's not like I've kind of brought up like I'm religious, and Utah is a very religious state. You know, like at least its foundation was originally, which is like, that's cool, but there's also some downsides, I would say, and that there's like definitely like two sides to Utah. You have kind of like a religious side, but you kind of also have this like anti-establishment side, if that makes sense, because like there is such a prominent force, aka like, you know, religious institutions. For example, my school that I went to is a religious institution. Because there's like, it's so strong, there's like the other side to that, if that makes sense.
Good.
And it was actually hard for me to navigate as a musician, I would say, because I don't know, I don't like when things are so like, I don't know.
Like polarized?
Polarized,
like
right?
that,
like
yeah.
I was just like, I just want to live my life and make music.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But it's either like you have to be like, okay, are you like with us?
Yeah,
against
exactly.
this sort of like religious establishment, or are you with them?
Yeah,
That sort of
exactly.
thing.
It was like very like, you couldn't have feet in both camps by any means. Like you could,
That's
but like you
interesting.
couldn't. And like maybe other people could, and maybe this is in my head. That's a big reason why like me and my wife moved to New York. It wasn't just that like, you know, there were more opportunities here, but it was like I wanted like freedom. Because out here in New York City, you can be anything. Like
Right.
nobody cares. Nobody
Yeah.
has time to care
Right, yeah.
what you
Exactly.
think or how you feel. You know, I can like do whatever I want out here. So it's kind of funny because I feel like New York City's so known for being compact and like claustrophobic. But like when I got here, I was like, I can breathe. I was like, this is awesome, you know? Because I am religious, but I also love like really cool music that's breaking rules. I like both things, you know? So I don't want to feel like I have to like choose like where I stand in different areas. But there's a lot of people I'm sure in Utah that are doing it way better than I did. So I feel bad for... I'm not trying to say anything bad about Utah. Just clarifying.
Disclaimer. On the topic of like polarization and like and that kind of stuff, how do you feel about like the like jazz classical dichotomy in music schools?
The thing is, like, I hate boxes a little bit. I think like labels can be beneficial, but they also can be really damaging.
Right.
And I honestly don't know if either of them are that helpful, to be honest with you. Because like, I think it's so important to understand jazz, and I think it's so important to understand classical. For example, like, I genuinely believe that, like, some of my best musical experiences I've had were in orchestras. I love playing Shostakovich. You know, like, Beethoven is, like, my, like, Elgar. I don't know. Whatever. Debussy. It's my thing. I love it. Puccini. And then, like, jazz, of course, as, like, that's why we met, was through jazz school. Like, obviously, like, Coltrane and Miles Davis and all these different things are, like, huge in my development, and like I owe a lot of that to school.
Right.
But I think anytime you make things really academic, it can hurt things, but it can also benefit things. There's definitely like two sides to it. But I was actually just talking to Paul Chihara about this, my mentor. We were having dinner the other day on the Upper West Side, and we were talking about that, how like it seems like music that's like that really like progresses and like becomes cutting edge isn't happening all the time in schools, if that makes sense. Because like the music that really like is killing it and like really like pushes things are breaking rules, and that like happens, I don't know, not in schools necessarily. Like it can, I think it can for sure, but and I think like jazz and classical, and who am I to say this? It's a humble opinion, but like I think jazz and classical could produce more. Like, and they are, but like, I think if there was more freedom to break rules, there would be more progression.
Yeah.
But like the way I view jazz right now, to be honest with you, is like there seems to be like a big standstill in a lot of it, just because there are so many rules. And like, even though it's not supposed to be so rule driven, it feels like it's become so in part of every university and every high school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's become such a like, it's like a history class, which it is, and it should be, and we need to respect its ancestors. But like everybody's like too afraid to like write new history on it. And I mean, I'm not, because I don't feel like I have the authority to do it. So that's why I'm doing indie music, because like I feel like at least in that arena I can do something fun, you know?
Right.
But I love jazz and I love classical, and I think there are some really cool musicians and artists that are doing groundbreaking, beautiful things, but I think like making it so academic has kind of hindered its progress maybe a little bit.
Yeah. I feel like also like isn't like boxes are relatively important because you have to define a box in order to break a box. That's what I tell all my students. But in music school, like you don't have much of that breaking of the box. You know, it's like kind of defining the box and like stay here.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like a lot of people do end up doing that.
Yeah. Well, like my mentor would say to me, it was like my last semester of, grad school, and Paul was like, Donovan, get out of school while you still have talent. And I was just like, I thought that was like hilarious. And he's like teaching as an adjunct professor. It's like so hypocritical, right? It's like, or ironic, I shouldn't say hypocritical. But I think, a good teacher does do that. They like create the box, because you need to know where you're coming from. Like, I think that is so crucial. Like, don't try and play Coltrane's music if you don't know Coltrane. Right. And don't even try and drum to a Coltrane record if you don't study Elvin Jones. Right. Like you need to know these things. What kind of cymbal was Elvin using? You need to know these different aspects before you like try and make a mark on things. But I think a good teacher opens the box for you and kind of like pushes you out and says like, hey, like go fly,
Right.
Spread your wings. Yeah, I know this is getting like, oof.
Yeah.
This is like not what I expected, but this is really good. I'm enjoying this.
We asked the hard hitting questions. No, I mean one thing that I like to talk about. Sean and I are both products of music school. Like we did all the years of jazz school, and most of our friends are in that area. But it's also interesting, like, it's becoming a conversation of, like, is music school necessary? What good does it provide? Like, all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to ask everyone who we talk to about it.
Yeah.
To give, like, to paint, like, a whole picture of really, like, what you're getting out of music school and how it defines a musician.
Music school is like this, it's this weird issue where it costs so much money. And you're like, why am I doing this?
Right.
You know, and like there has to be a more efficient way to do it that's less expensive. But like we were kind of saying, like everything I have musically has come from music school.
Right.
Us talking right now
is
is because of
right.
music school, right? Every
Right.
person I play with in New York City is either through like my church community or my school, you know? So I think like music school definitely like creates this opportunity for you to meet people, to like learn cool things. I think my only complaint with music school is how expensive it is.
Right.
And like, where's the money even going? You know what I mean? Is it even going to the professors or, you know, and I don't know enough to like have an argument on that. I like music school. I feel like I would never want to teach at a music, like that's ironic because I teach at a music school right now, but that's for like little kids, right? Or, and some adults, but those are like beginning musicians. But I don't know if I'd ever want to teach at a university. And we were talking about this the other day. If I went like into teaching down the road, I would rather do it like pretty one-on-one, like mentorships or like, you know, because I think like that's where things get really cool is the collaboration between like really like high up there artists and people who want to get to that level, you know?
Yeah.
So I like music schools. I think they're too expensive and they need to open the box, kind of like we were talking about.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that metaphor is going to make, anyways.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about songwriting process? What does it look like when you sit down to, or if you do sit down to write a song? Like how does it go when like the conception of your new song?
You know, that's a good question. I was thinking about it earlier today and yesterday. There's something I read about Beethoven once, and once again, I'm not going to compare myself to Beethoven because that's like not even a comparison to be drawn. But I was reading somewhere that he like would have musical ideas in his mind, like motifs for like, you know, and he would just have them like in his mind for years, maybe, you know, and then like, then all of a sudden inspiration struck and it was like, da 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 dum, da 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 dum, right? And then we have like his Fifth Symphony or something, you know, but like they were just kind of floating in there until like inspiration like put them into place on a very lower level. That's kind of how I think I feel about writing songs, where I'll have, and it's usually like kind of more chord progressions. I'll have some like ideas floating around my head, maybe a melody, usually like kind of like a chord progression or even just a feeling, you know, just like an idea. I don't even know what you would describe it as. That's just kind of ruminating in my mind and heart. It could be for months. And then there's two levels to writing a song after that. And I hope this makes sense. But I call it soul phase, like SOUL, where, and it usually happens, at least historically, in the middle of the night, where like I'm going to bed and I'm like, crap. Like I can't say because it's like, dang it, there's something that has to like happen. And what usually happens is I wake up and one of those things that's been like in my mind for a few months or whatever manifests itself, like comes into my head, and I usually write the song in like 1 or 2 takes.
Right.
Pretty much everything.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's just kind of like boom, done. Inspiration hits. And I've been thinking about the music for a long time. I just don't know where it fits. And then like sometime in the middle of the night, it fits. And I put it together. I try not to wake up my family, you know, or annoy the neighbors or anything. And I just like really quietly with headphones, I'll write out the song, and I usually write the lyrics like that night. But I call that like the soul of the song. It's kind of like the bare bones.
Or it's like the skeleton.
It's like a skeleton. And then phase 2 is like, I call it dressing the song. So like you take the person, the skeleton, and then you put clothes on. So I take my song and I put clothes on, and those clothes are like production, orchestration, arrangement. So I guess, but that takes a long time for me at least.
Right.
So it's like the actual like skeleton, emotions, feeling, soul of the song, that's like a matter of 20 minutes.
Right.
But like the actual like getting it to a point where I'd ever want to release it or like perform it, like for a lot of people, that's a lot more of a tedious process of like, okay, what sounds cool here. What kind of colors do I want to use? What kind of instruments are we going to use? Like, what kind of, like, are we going to do a bridge, an outro, an intro? Those types of things, like, are fun to kind of collaborate with people on.
Right.
You know, I like using producers or, like, other musicians, and we bounce ideas. But it has to stay true to that initial inspiration of, like, the song.
I feel like with that process, like, the constant rumination in your head, it's like you're pretty efficient when it comes to, like, keeping songs that you write, too.
Yeah.
Like, it's because you've thought about them so much, and it comes out so naturally. It's like you don't write something that you don't like.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing this interview with Bill Withers, and apparently he recorded every song that he wrote. He never threw away any songs that he ever wrote.
Yeah.
And Billy Drews talks about that too, saying like you just write down everything, no matter what it is, and you could judge it later.
Yeah, what's like even funny, like there's definitely a few songs I didn't throw them out, but like that I haven't used. There's like songs that are just kind of like floating that like, because the inspiration I think comes sometimes it's like all there. Like I said, when I'm writing an individual song, it's like it just like happens after like months of ruminating. But then like sometimes I'll write a song and I'm like, okay, I don't know where this fits in anything. But it's cool because then like later on I have like an idea for an album and that song like fits perfectly in that idea. Like literally on the way here, walking down your street, I had the idea for like the next album that I haven't even released. I have like 3 years of music that I haven't even released that I'm like sitting on. And I'm like, oh crap! Like I gotta release this before, like you know.
Dude, you should see my finale folder. It's got like literally hundreds of songs.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, you know exactly what that feels like. It's like almost a problem though, because like I tell Raylyn, my wife, all the time, because like sometimes by the time I release a song, I don't even know if I feel that way anymore.
Yeah, you're kind of like tired of the idea.
Yeah, or just like even like so like the first EP I released was called Pigeons. And it was kind of like, I mean, it's abstract, so I'm sure most people didn't like necessarily grasp this, but it was kind of heavy. And a little bit, it was meant to be a little bit dark, which was like really cathartic at the time as I wrote it. But then it's like funny because by the time I released it, I was like, oh, I'm better now. Like, this like really fits me anymore. So I'm trying to release the music as fast as possible so I still feel like it's an accurate representation of who I am. I feel like I'm growing faster than I can release music. And that's why I'm excited to start performing, because then at least I'm performing it.
Yeah.
But
one thing that I find interesting and kind of gives me hope and like excitement is like Wayne Shorter, for example, says that the composition never ends. Like there's no beginning, there's no end. It just kind of lives. And if you listen to his music, like if you listen to Orbits from like 67 and then listen to it from 2013 and then 2018, it's like completely different songs.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said about like how like a song still lives even though if it's not like released, or even if it is released, like it's still growing and breathing like we are.
Well, yeah, I think the key is what you just said, like we are, because I think music is definitely an extension of who we are.
Yeah.
You know, and like it's kind of going back to like Sufjan Stevens or even Radiohead. Actually, Radiohead's an amazing example of people who redefine themselves every album. You know, it's like you're just like, what the heck? Like when I realized that Radiohead wrote Creep, because I like knew Radiohead post Kid A, and then I find out they wrote Creep because like that wasn't my generation. I was like, what the heck is this? I was like, this isn't the same.
Yeah, it's completely different.
But like, and this is gonna contradict that a little bit, but like, at the same time, I always know it's Radiohead. You know, because it's who they are. Even if they redefine themselves every album, there's a certain string attached to each of them where it's like, oh yeah, that's Radiohead. It's the same way I feel about Sufjan. His music is so personal to him, like so personal. Like especially some of the albums he's released recently, but you know it's him. I don't know. Even if it's like a completely different aesthetic, even if it's just like off the wall, like where the heck did that come from? It's still like who he is, and like so it is like I don't know if that like really connects with what you're saying, but it made me think that like I plan to like grow as a musician. And, like, my songs, I'm sure, will look different and different as I get older, but they're always going to be me. And those songs that I wrote, like, back in the day will still be a part of who I am and my DNA.
I'm kind of feeling the same way with this album, because I'm releasing some songs from, like, 2017. And written about things completely differently than how I kind of imagine it now. But it's kind of cool, because it's still fitting. Well, I guess with lyrics, like, you're specific.
Yeah.
But I feel like two messages can mean... Or one message can mean two different things, depending on your perspective of the message.
Honestly, I write all my lyrics. Some of them are very obvious, but I purposefully write my lyrics super abstract. I don't
Right.
because partly for that reason, because like there's something about abstract art that's timeless in a way. I don't know if that makes sense. Like it could mean multiple things, and it means different things to different people. So like I've written a few lines where people are like, "Oh my gosh, like I love that. It made me realize this," and I was like, that's not at all what I was thinking when I wrote that. You know what I mean?
Right,
but like
yeah.
that's awesome, and it came from an inspired place. So if that's how it inspires you, cool. And honestly, I get that from like, not to get like biblical, but there's this like prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament who wrote like scriptures that everybody's like, what the heck is he talking about? It's like crazy abstract, right? But when like Jesus came, he was like, great are the words of Isaiah. But like everybody's like, I don't understand this. But like I think there's a reason like in my religion that like God would be like, his words are great. It's because like they're timeless.
Right.
Because he like kind of made them abstract. It like they could speak to all the ages if you have like ears to hear or whatever. Doesn't that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Sense?
Yeah.
I like packaging things abstractly because then like everybody gets to interpret it their own way, and it never goes old.
Right.
Yeah.
Kurt Cobain was a big guy on that. Like,
Really?
Yeah, I mean, because all his lyrics are basically nonsense. You know?
Yeah. That's
And one like the sentences are like kind of nonsense, and two, you can't even understand the words.
It's always like a problem though. I was just with one of my best friends from growing up was like visiting, and he like brought up this like lyric I wrote like in high school or something, and he thought it was like this abstract lyric, and he interpreted it like way inappropriately. Like and I was like, oh wait, that is not what I meant, dude. Like, so there's almost like a downside because I was like, I was thinking in this way, but you took it the wrong way, you know. So like I think there is some danger into like being too abstract because then people just straight up don't know what you're talking about. But I don't know. I think there's something beautiful. People can feel the emotion, and sometimes even if you don't know the lyric, it's like I can feel kind of what that means, which I guess it's kind of poetry. I guess you know.
Yeah. Oh, have you done any like songwriting exercises? Is that something that you do, or is it just all organic process?
So like actual songwriting is organic, but I do try and practice. So like I actually practice not songwriting. Like I study scores, like particularly like Debussy or even like Stravinsky or things that like are almost never gonna like show up obviously in my music, you know, like or like Schoenberg or something. But like the process of studying those things helps me like unlock certain parts of my creative brain, you know, that like hopefully will bleed into my music at some point. I don't think they really have yet. I don't think anybody's gonna listen to my music and be like, oh yeah, Bartok. Yeah, I can see the thrill.
That would be really hip.
That would be awesome. Maybe one day. But I do like to study those things because I think it does. Or like Ornette Coleman, for example. Like some of those things like help me think differently than I would have normally.
Right.
And that helps me stay fresh in like how I approach music.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm not like that kind of person that like is like I'm gonna write a song a day, you know,
Right.
or like I'm gonna do this like no matter what, start to finish. It's very much just like when it happens, and in the meantime, I'm thinking about music, I'm experiencing things. I read a lot of books, like almost like actually I'm writing a blog post about it. I don't want to explain too much of my lyrics, but my wife wants me to write a blog post of all of like the literary references that like all my lyrics connect to, because like I would say a lot of my lyrics and just like a lot of the things that are inspired by my like with my music come from books that I read. So I read a lot, I listen to a ton of music, and I study composers and stuff like that. That's kind of where I go from.
What have you been reading?
I'm reading As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner right now. And then I'm reading Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman.
Nice.
And I'm listening to Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I have a night book that puts me to sleep, which is Walt Whitman. Sorry, dude. And then like I have my audio book for like the train, which is C.S. Lewis right now. And then like reading with my hands, not my hands, but you know, like having an actual book in my hands, I'm reading As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. I can do it more too because I take care of my baby during the day, and so when she's taking a nap, I just read or something.
Right. How's fatherhood changed the way you approach music, think about music?
You know, this is funny because I'm going to try and say this quick because I don't know why, but I was like, I bet you, like, I don't know. I thought about this answer before I even came here. When I'm not reading, one of my biggest inspirations is Chef's Table. Have you guys ever watched that, like the cooking show?
Oh, no.
Have we talked about this before?
I haven't watched that specifically.
Yeah. It's like, dude, they're so beautiful. But it's just about these like amazing chefs that like open these like crazy cool restaurants, and their stories of how they became these types of chefs, and like they sacrifice a lot, and they like they're groundbreaking. It's risky. They lose a lot of money. It's just an intense process. But this one guy said something. He was a dad, you know, had like a young family, and he was like, he said something along the lines of like, he's like, some people think that art comes from like art for art's sake. Like some of the great things, you know, come that way. But he's like, great art comes from having your back against the wall. So for him, for example, he was like opening up restaurants, but then when his family was struggling and he was trying to like provide for his family, that's when he was like, okay, like, let's do this. Yeah. We have to make this happen. Right. And I'm not in like a desperate situation, but like having my daughter and just being like, you know, married, having a daughter and different things, it kind of switched from being like, oh, you know, I can do whatever I want and it doesn't matter because I'm the only person I have to feed right now. It's like, oh dang, this music thing better work. You know what I mean? Because it's like not about me anymore. So balancing success has become necessary, I guess is what you could say. I really do want to have success and do well, but I want to do it while being true to who I am, if that makes sense. Like selling out is like, I'd rather just teach music. You know what I mean? I'm not going to like write music for other people just for the sake of that, to make money. Like if we're going to do this composition stuff, if we're going to write music, if we're going to write songs, it has to be because like it's coming from who I am. But like if we are doing that, it kind of needs to stick at some point, you know, because like I've got a baby at home, you know what I mean? So I don't know, it kind of adds a little bit of pressure, but in a good way, because I think it can push you to work harder and you take bigger risks because you have to.
Yeah,
you know?
I feel like being comfortable like usually doesn't provide any kind of like musical thing. Like it's something I feel like sometimes it does. Like you need your rest, but I think from those like high intensity situations, like having a baby, it's like there's something more on the table now. There's like more at stake.
I mean, for people who do want to become parents or have the opportunity, it's like the hardest thing you ever do. It's so hard, but it brings out a different element of who you are, which I think other things maybe can too, but like parenthood for me, at least in my life, has brought out this person in me I didn't know existed, and that has actually made me a better musician. Like there were parts of me, like different characteristics of who I was that like have like become manifest as of becoming a dad, and that's really influenced my music. Also, one more thing, I care about what I'm putting out because my daughter will one day listen to it.
Right.
Like it kind of like changes, like it's like, oh, what do I want to be remembered by? You know, for my kids, you know, it's kind of like, not that any of my music's like inappropriate or anything, but like it's kind of like you're thinking about your legacy all of a sudden. It's like, oh, I want my children, like whether they like my music or not, you know, that would suck if they don't, but like I at least want them to be able to be like, oh yeah, my dad wrote that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or something like that.
So you mentioned a blog. Where can we read those blog posts as they come out?
www.donovantaylourmusic.com.
Cool.
I'm just kidding. Sorry. DonovanTaylorMusic.com. Yeah, I have a website with. It shows all my music that's coming out, but I write blog posts. I don't know who reads them, but
I actually saw it the other day, so I actually didn't read them, but I like saved it on my like need to read list.
Oh, that makes me happy. Yeah, I keep them pretty short. Some of them are just about like music I'm releasing, but some of them are actually just about like thoughts I have, or like I said, like maybe a lot of the literary allusions. I'll explain those, but it's kind of a nice way for me not to post on social media.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like...
It's like constructive social media.
Exactly. Because nobody has to read it unless they're looking for it, you know? And then, like, I can actually explain my point thoroughly, or...
Yeah, you're not, like, doing a minute-long TikTok where you have to, like...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And plus, I just kind of miss stuff like that, you know? I write in a blog or a journal, and... So, feel free to check it out, anyone.
Yeah. All the links that we mentioned are going to be in the description of wherever you're viewing this. But any other plugs you have to give us? Got your EP Pigeons.
So yeah, I have an EP Pigeons that's out. I released singles that are called Happy But Not Really. And then the next thing to keep your eye out for is a new EP called Falling and Being Found. And these two guys are going to play some instruments on it. And it'll be produced by my friend Robert Willis. So these guys are good guys, though. We're going to be working together a lot.
Looking forward to it.
And if you want us to play in your stuff, go to tearingoutrecordings.com. The link will be in the description. Cool. Yeah,
Cool.
But I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much, Donovan, for coming on and sharing all your secrets.
Are you kidding me? I'm happy to. It was a privilege. Thank you, guys.
Of course.
Yeah, and anyone who stuck around this long, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next podcast.